flag, an amulet, an illustration from a manuscript, a burial jar, a piece of bone. More than just objects in a museum or a history book, these speak to us today perhaps more urgently than in times of their creation. In this season, Dayaw explores the objects and manuscripts that form a puzzle. One that challenges our own conceptions of who we are and what our purpose as a nation is. All are vital clues in our continuing search for our knowledge, our pride. Slowly but surely, local celebrities and fashion trends are mirroring a rediscovery of pre-colonial and indigenous designs. Of course, the demands of various media dictate that these incarnations be glitzier, more dramatic, and yes, sometimes over the top. But they do point to a growing interest in discovering points of design long overshadowed by imported trends. Personally, I love this trend. As you can see from my own personal choices, I fully support the movement, the designers, the young forces in the creative industries. But in order to reinterpret these, we should first get to know the originals. In order to appreciate them as sources of inspiration, we must first regard them as symbols. What did our ancestors look like? How did they dress and carry themselves? Surely, if modern Filipinos consider themselves stylish and on trend, then we must have this elegance in our DNA. One manuscript from 1590 has vividly colored images of our ancestors, as well as our neighbors from Southeast Asia. This is the invaluable reference known as the Boxer Codex.
In 1590, the Governor General, at that time Gomez Perez Dasmariñas, he was supposed to make a report on what's happening in the Philippines. They produced a document basically owned by his son, Luis Perez Dasmariñas, that details the different situations and customs of people in what is now called the Philippines. A certain Lord Ilchester got the manuscript. So Lord Ilchester owned this manuscript until the bombing of his house in the 1940s. By 1947, this codex, this book, was auctioned and it was brought by a professor named Charles Boxer. Charles Boxer then subsequently donated it to the Lilly Library in Indiana.
Inspired by the research of Martin Derrada, 15 of the hand-drawn illustrations deal with the inhabitants of the Philippines. The fascinating illustrations not only record the dress and adornment of our ancestors, they also show the nuances of gesture, posture, and attitude. A well-dressed lady from Cagayan is seen wearing a blouse with a gold applique closure as well as gold bracelets and headdress. An Ibanag warrior, also from Cagayan, holds a wooden shield which is remarkably similar to shields still used today. A couple from Lingayen Gulf is shown in brightly colored and sumptuously draped fabrics, while hunters from Zambales wear bright red loincloths, attesting to the fondness of our ancestors for this vibrant and symbolic color. This fascination and reverence for the color red as a symbol of the life force is still very prevalent today among the peoples of the Cordillera. The noble couple from the Tagalog region features a male also wearing red. His suit is made up of pantaloons and a camisa. His wife is dressed in a tube skirt and a loose jacket. Both are bedecked in gold. Another Tagalog couple wears a similar silhouette. Class distinction in pre-Hispanic Tagalog society is evident in the captions and labels of the manuscript. Here is a member of the Maginoo or noble class. Ordinary citizens like this pair of veiled women were equally stylish and some.
My personal favorites about the place would be the depiction of the Tagalog, which again tells us that they're quite elaborate with their clothing, and they had gold adornments, which were eventually proven by archaeological finds in different parts of the country, where we were finding pre-colonial gold from the bodies of datus, from the graves of our ancestors that were recovered, that are actually very similar to the ones that were shown in the Boxer Codex.
The Visayans were also represented in the Boxer Codex. The male from this illustration of the kadatuan or noble class wears a long tunic and turban.
Unang ginamit ang katagang State of the Nation sa 1935 Constitution, kung saan inatasan ang Pangulo ng Pilipinas na i-report sa Kongreso ang State of the Nation. Kasunod nito, ginamit ni dating Pangulong Manuel Rojas ang Message on the State of the Nation bilang pamagat ng kanyang talumpati sa Kongreso noong January 27, 1947. Bagamat hindi nila inilagay sa 1987 Constitution ang katagang State of the Nation, ang paggamit nito ay itinuturi ng tradisyon sa kasaysayan ng politika sa bansa. Abangan ang ika-4 na State of the Nation Address ni Pangulong Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr. ngayong Hulyo, dito sa inyong PTV.
An intriguing set of illustrations from the Boxer Codex details the outfits of women referred to as binukot. We know the binukot today as a near mythic, well-kept daughters of the Panay Bukidnon. These ladies were shielded from the rigors of manual labor and were expected to learn the finer arts of chanting and singing the epics. Series of binukot women from the Boxer Codex show them in loose, flowing tube skirts and short blouses, simple, well-cut outfits, neatly color coordinated. But the use of gold accessories on the head, the neck, and the wrists, even as trim on the blouse and skirt, as testaments to a very restrained, dignified, and comfortable style. Equally fascinating is the illustration of the Visayan pintados with tattoos on their faces, torsos, arms, legs, and backside.
These tattooed warriors were actually called hangaway in Visayas, or the mga ngayaw. And the pintados had the elaborate symbols, including the sun symbol, which is a symbol of Bathala. And we understand why it is believed that those tattoos were actually, the purpose of those tattoos was actually the purpose of the anting-anting, which is to protect them in battle.
The illustrations from the Boxer Codex should be viewed as more than just current inspirations. The very fact that the artist took such pains to record the details and nuances of costume shows how our ancestors captured the imagination of foreigners.
The Spanish and American historians, they emphasize that we got our culture from them, and that basically we were barbarians. We did not have any culture. We had no civilization. This codex and the images of the codex and the contents of the codex tells us that it's very clear that the Spaniards, when they came, actually recorded that we did have a civilization.
And jewelry that our ancestors wore, pieces very similar to the ones worn by the subjects of the Boxer Codex, have been excavated in grave sites all over the archipelago. Most notably in Agusan and Pangasinan. At the Ayala Museum, the full range of design and technique that ancient jewelers used in creating these pieces is on permanent display. The late scholar, researcher, jeweler, and collector Ramon Villegas shared his insights on how such pieces reflected an innate style and refined taste.
Yung Pilipino na nagpunta sa India o nagpunta sa Southeast, ibang parte ng Southeast Asia, nakita nila yung ginagawa doon sa ginto sa ibang bansa, kinokopya nila, inaano nila, dinedevelop nila yung karunungan na yon hanggat sa nag-develop tayo ng sarili nating kaalaman. Every region developed separately, and every region had a particular need for development of the jewelry tradition. Ang isang example niyan, may mga klase ng jewelry na sinasabi ng iba, dala daw ng Kastila. Hindi totoo yun, kasi dito talaga nag-develop yung design at yung Kastila natuto sa atin. Yung mga Pilipino simulat sapol were great travelers. Hindi talaga totoo na na-discover tayo. Matagal na tayong nakadiscover sa mundo. So, lahat ng klase ng influensya napapasok na dito pagdating ng Kastila.
Our admiration for our ancestors' innate sense of style is just the starting point. Surely, their fastidious attention to dress is also a clue to higher sensibilities, a cultivation of both mind and spirit. The Laguna copper plate is one artifact that reveals much more than what we initially see. The earliest known written document is in form a sheet of copper with ancient writing. Discovered in 1898, it is a 10th century record of a debt settlement. In English, the document would have read thus. The document goes on to say that all descendants of Namawaran are absolved of all debt. The The document is important for many reasons. It shows that we had both a calendar and high degree of literacy, a great asset for recording events. It shows that there were laws and ministers, a whole bureaucracy in place for the settlement of legal and financial affairs. Copper plate used Kawi, an Indonesian script which was useful for trade relations with Indonesia, Brunei, and other Southeast Asian countries at the time. We also had baybayin for domestic purposes. Baybayin and related indigenous writing systems were once widely used all over the archipelago. One of these variants, the Surat Mangyan of the Mangyan of Mindoro, is still used and is being taught in the schools of living tradition.
Ang pinaka-importante po sa akin bilang mamamahayag is to shine the light on important issues para higit silang maintindihan. More than the rhetoric over and above the debate, ang pag-uusap po natin ay magbubunga ng mga idea at solusyon. At yung mga solusyon na yan ang maaring maging basihan para sa konkretong aksyon. Ayan mga kaibigan, halina po kayo at pag-usapan natin.
Tutukan tuwing Lunes at Huwebes alas 8 ng gabi. Dito lang sa PTV.
Perhaps none of the material aspects of our pre-Hispanic culture is more dramatic or powerful a symbol as the Manunggul jar. A secondary burial jar excavated from a Neolithic cave site in Lipuun Point in Palawan. It dates from 890 to 710 BC. The most striking detail is the cover, which depicts a soul being ferried on a small boat. This small sculpture is resonant with meanings and symbols.
It is very important as far as our culture is concerned because it is the first artifact that shows of our idea or our ancestors' idea of the afterlife, because it shows on the lid two people riding a boat or a bangka, and then one is steering the boat towards the afterlife. So the belief in the afterlife is very much evident in that particular type of artifact.
Here is a journey to the afterlife. On a boat, the most far-reaching and accessible means of transport to the early Filipinos, while the boatman keeps a steady gaze on the horizon, the soul of the deceased tilts his head up towards the sky world. On the body of the jar, curvilinear forms are incised and painted in red hematite.
Tells us that we have belief in afterlife, that after death doesn't mean that people just leave the place, because there is something that is lost in the translation, because in Filipino we call it sumakabilang buhay. So it's still life. You just change your the plane where you are living. But when you have it in English, which is already an afterlife, then there is the notion of death. But again, going back to the Filipino language na sumakabilang buhay, you're still alive on a different plane. So with that, it's the very first one is you have the boat that signifies our I think maritime culture, then the belief in afterlife, which are very important as far as the ancient Filipinos or our ancestors are concerned.
The Manunggul jar is a national cultural treasure that shows how our ancestors viewed death as a transition, the continuing of a journey. A different mindset about death is seen in the secondary burial jars discovered in the Ayub cave in Maito, sometimes comic, sometimes grave, sometimes whimsical. The one thing I can feel for sure is that each piece was made with not just skill, but affection, love even. For memory seems to animate each face with a fondness of personal remembrance.
So the practice of burying, of secondary burial is prevalent or being practiced by ancient Filipinos. So what is this practice? So when someone dies, he or she is buried, and then after a few years, or if they did not use years as a basis to come up with exhumation, flesh has been gone. After some time, it's only the bones that are left. Then they have to conduct another ritual, and then that is the time that we now have a secondary burial. So the bones of the dead would be placed in a jar and then kept in high places, because if they are in high places, that means it is nearer to the afterlife. We have to remember also that when someone dies in the community, it's not only the family who is grieving or who is part of the whole process of burying the dead, it's the community.
If our ancestors memorialized their dead in clay, other Filipino peoples chose other mediums. These Tausug grave markers are carved from hardwood to resist exposure to the elements. While no anthropomorphic figures are found on these memorials to the dead, the curvilinear ukir designs stretch onward and outward, echoing the Islamic concepts of eternity and infinity. In these objects associated with death, we see how our ancestors treated death. Simply as a stage of a soul's transition to be memorialized with fondness, hope, and yes, a beauty that reaches out to our time. Still symbols of nationhood? I think the question should be, will we ever stop needing symbols of nationhood? Or will we ever have enough symbols of nationhood? As the world grows smaller, the human race finds itself even more fragmented and divided. Now, more than ever, we need to rediscover the power of a symbol as something far greater than we are. The flag in its evolution, the moral and personal codes that we find in the Decalogos, the return to the power of the self and the divine that is contained in an anting-anting, the story of our evolution in a bone, in a boat, in an illustration of our intrinsic elegance and nobility. All fragments of a national journey, symbols of a continuing quest for nationhood. As Dayaw approaches its 10th season, we find that there are far more subjects that should be documented and covered. From aspects of our indigenous technology to the tangible and intangible heritage of our indigenous people. From the simplest manifestations of our sense of beauty to the struggles that determine the preservation and survival of a heritage. This is Loren Legarda of Dayaw, and this is our mandate to continually show you the manifold ways in which you are Filipino. And why Dayaw, our knowledge, our pride, should be important to you.